My name is Olivia Carter, and 5 years ago, my own family tried to stop me from boarding a plane to Paris for my graduation. That morning in our kitchen in Phoenix, I held the envelope with my ticket in it and checked the time on my phone. 5 hours until I had to be at the airport. My mom walked in, saw the envelope, and her face hardened. Before I could explain, she snatched it from my hand, crossed the room, opened the big green trash can by the garage door, and dropped the ticket in. My little sister stood beside her and laughed. "What does a beggar like you need a graduation dream in Paris for?" she said, loud enough to sting more than any slap. Their laughter filled the house. For a second, I could not move. Then I did. I walked over, lifted the lid, and reached into the sticky, foul-smelling trash without flinching. I pulled out the crumpled ticket, wiped it on my jeans, grabbed my suitcase, and headed for the front door. "If you walk out that door, do not come crawling back," my mom shouted. I stopped only long enough to say that choice was hers, not mine. 5 hours later, I was in the air, flying to the city they swore I would never see. 5 years later, my home security camera would show me two tired, desperate faces at my front door, pressing the bell like their lives depended on it. And this time, the beggars were not me. If you have ever had someone try to throw your future in the trash, stick around. Hit like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs proof that walking away can be the start of everything. When the plane finally leveled out above the clouds, I leaned my head back against the seat and tried to breathe. But my mind kept dragging me back to Phoenix, to the slow way everything had been rotting long before that ticket hit the trash. I grew up in a one-story house on the edge of the city, in a neighborhood where every driveway had the same cracked concrete and the same sunburned grass. My mom, Lisa, was always exhausted from her job at a big box furniture store, walking in with sore feet and a stack of bills, reminding us how much everything cost. My little sister Jenna was almost always on her phone, filming little outfit videos or practicing poses in the living room like the world was already watching her. I was the one who filled the empty spaces. I opened the cafe at 5 in the morning, took the early bus, came home smelling like espresso and sugar syrup, and then I cooked, cleaned, and squeezed in online art classes with whatever time was left. I paid part of the rent every month, slid folded cash onto the counter, and my mom would scoop it up without really looking at me, mumbling something about how it barely scratched the surface. Jenna would roll her eyes and joke that I should paint faster if I wanted to be useful. On paper, we looked like a normal working family. In reality, there was a clear rule nobody ever said out loud. My worth was measured only in what I could provide for them, not in who I wanted to become. I did not talk much about Paris at first. The idea felt fragile, like a soap bubble that would pop the second I said it out loud. Late at night, when they were asleep, I sat on the floor of my tiny bedroom, surrounded by canvases propped against the walls. I painted the same feeling over and over, a figure trying to climb out of a box while hands reached in to pull them back. I sent photos of those pieces to an international art program based in Paris, half convinced they would never even open my email. When the acceptance letter came, it was a cheap white envelope with a logo in the corner, and my name spelled correctly for the first time in a long time. They offered me a partial scholarship and a spot in their graduation showcase. I stared at the words until they blurred, because for the first time, someone who did not share my last name was saying I was worth investing in. When I told my mom, she did not smile. She stared at the letter like it was a scam. "Paris," she said slowly, as if the city itself was an insult. "Who is going to pay the bills while you play artist in France?" I said I would keep working until I left, that the program covered most of my tuition, that I had savings, that this was my shot. She shook her head and waved the paper at Jenna as if I were telling a joke. "My little influencer," she said to my sister, "at least you are doing something real, something with a future. Then she looked back at me. Art does not pay the mortgage, Olivia. Coffee tips do not keep the lights on. You are dreaming. It hurt because she knew exactly how many hours I stood on my feet to bring those tips home. It hurt even more when Jenna chimed in, smirking like she was doing me a favor. You are always asking for more time, more understanding, more everything, she said, begging for chances. And for what? Some sad painting in a city you cannot even afford to live in. She called me a beggar, like it was just a punchline, like the word belonged to me. That night I stood at the sink, washing their dishes while they laughed in the living room, and I realized something I had been trying not to face for years. In that house, I would never be more than free labor with a messy dream they were embarrassed by. They did not see my acceptance letter as an achievement. They saw it as a threat. If I left, they would lose the person who picked up shifts, scrubbed pans, and quietly paid off late notices. If I stayed, I would lose the only chance I had to be more than the beggar in my own home. That was the tension hanging in the air the morning my mom saw the plane ticket on the counter. That was everything behind her eyes when she walked it to the trash. And that was everything behind mine when I reached in and chose, finally, not to stay small, just because it made them comfortable. The funny thing about leaving home is that it does not feel like a movie moment while it is happening. There is no dramatic music when you drag your suitcase across a cracked driveway, no slow motion when the Uber pulls up. There is just the sound of your own heartbeat and the question pounding in your head, asking if you are making the biggest mistake of your life. As the car pulled away from our house in Phoenix, I watched the front door in the side mirror, half expecting it to fly open, for my mom to come running out and say she did not mean it. It stayed shut. The only thing that followed me was the memory of her voice telling me not to come crawling back. On the way to the airport, my phone buzzed with a text from Taylor, my best friend since high school. She had been the only one who said Paris made sense, that my talent was real, even when I could not believe it myself. She sent a screenshot of the transfer she had made, a small amount of money pulled from her own paycheck as a nurse. Her message was short. I cannot fix your family, Liv, but I can help you get on that plane. Please do not waste this chance. I stared at her words until my eyes burned, then typed back a simple thank you, because if I tried to say more, I was pretty sure I would cry loud enough for the driver to hear. By the time I landed in Paris, the sun was setting behind gray clouds, and whatever romantic image I had of the city vanished under a blast of cold air the second I stepped outside. My program had arranged a tiny dorm room on the edge of the city, a narrow bed against one wall, a small desk against the other, and a window that looked out over a street that never really slept. I dragged my suitcase up 3 flights of stairs, unlocked the door, and realized that for the first time in my life, nobody was going to walk in behind me. Nobody was going to yell about dishes or ask where the rent money was. The silence felt like a relief and a weight at the same time. The next morning, reality really hit. Groceries cost more than I expected. My scholarship covered tuition and part of the housing, but not the small daily things that add up fast. I walked for hours, leaving my resume at cafes and shops, stumbling through basic French, trying to smile like I belonged there. After a week, a small coffee shop near the art school hired me for early shifts. A few days after that, one of my professors mentioned that a local gallery owner needed part-time help preparing for an upcoming show. That is how I met Elise Rousseau. The first time I walked into her gallery, I was almost afraid to breathe. The space was simple. White walls, concrete floors, canvases hung so that each one had room to speak. Elise herself was sharp and contained, with gray hair pulled back and a way of looking at you that made you want to stand up straighter. She barely glanced at my resume before nodding. "We need someone to carry ladders and not drop anything," she said. "Can you manage that?" I managed. I swept floors, unpacked crates, held my arms up until they shook while she decided if a painting needed to be a half-inch higher or lower. For weeks, I was just another pair of hands, another student trying to survive the city. One night, after we closed, I was wiping down a table when she noticed the sketchbook sticking out of my bag. She asked to see it in that dry, casual way that still somehow felt like a test. I hesitated, then handed it over. She flipped through page after page of messy mixed media pieces, scraps of ticket stubs, coffee receipts, paint scraped on top of pencil lines. Most of them were variations of the same image: a figure reaching out of a pile of trash, a hand gripping a paper ticket that looked almost exactly like the one my mother had thrown away. "You are very literal," she said, snapping the book shut. "But you are honest." It was the closest thing to praise I had heard in a long time. She told me to email her 3 polished pieces for review. If she liked them, she might hang one in a small corner of the gallery. No promises. I stayed up for 3 nights straight, working in that tiny dorm room, my floor covered in paint-splattered newspapers. When I finally delivered the finished pieces, my hands were still stained with color. A week later, I walked into the gallery, and there, in the far left corner, was one of my canvases on the wall with a tiny printed label under it that read, "Olivia Carter, Mixed Media." I stood in front of it, unable to move, while guests shuffled past holding glasses of cheap white wine. Most did not stop. A few did. One older woman, an American tourist, stood there longer than the rest, tilting her head as if trying to see what I had buried in the layers. She asked Elise who the artist was. Elise pointed at me. The woman smiled and said she would like to buy the piece. The amount she paid was not huge. But when Elise put the envelope in my hand at the end of the night, it felt like the universe was whispering that maybe I was not crazy for coming here. That envelope paid for groceries and bus rides, and a few nights where I did not have to worry about skipping meals. More than that, it paid for a small piece of my self-respect. I was no longer just the girl who handed over her tips at a kitchen counter and got called a beggar. For the first time, I was an artist who got paid for her work. What I did not know yet was that this tiny sale would be the first link in a chain leading straight back to that same word and the people who had used it to break me. Success did not show up in Paris with fireworks and fanfare. It showed up as early alarms, sore feet, and nights where my eyes ached from staring at canvases under cheap dorm room light. After that first sale, I went right back to opening the coffee shop at dawn, wiping down tables for strangers who would never know that my art was hanging in a gallery just a few blocks away. In between classes and shifts, I kept painting, filling sketchbooks with the same recurring image of escape, layering paper scraps and paint until my hands cramped. Elise watched quietly. She did not compliment often, but she asked more questions, and that was her version of caring. "What are you trying to say here?" she would ask, tapping a corner of a canvas. "Why are you hiding the ticket under so much paint?" It forced me to think about my work as more than therapy. It had to be a story other people could feel. When my program announced the final graduation showcase, my classmates buzzed like this was their big break. For me, it felt more like a test. The show would be held in a bigger gallery in the city, with visiting curators from London, New York, and Berlin. 1 piece per student. No second chances. I chose a large mixed media canvas that had taken me months to build up. Layers of trash textures, receipts, torn coffee sleeves, bus tickets, all circling around a single crumpled boarding pass in the center. It was not an exact copy of my real ticket, but it carried the memory of it. I called the piece Exit Wound. The week before the show, I almost pulled it. I told Elise it was too personal, that people would not get it, that maybe I should put up something prettier and easier. She raised an eyebrow and said, "In this city, pretty is cheap. Honest is rare. If you are going to take up space on a wall, make it worth it." So I stayed with it. On the night of the showcase, I stood in a rented black dress and shoes that pinched, pretending I was not about to throw up from nerves. My classmates clustered with their families, speaking rapid French or Italian, parents pointing proudly at their names on the program. I stood alone at first, holding a plastic cup of sparkling water. Taylor had texted from Phoenix during her break at the hospital, sending a photo of her watching a live stream on her phone. "I am so proud of you," she wrote. "Your family has no idea what they threw away." When the doors opened, the room filled with the sound of voices and clinking glasses. People drifted in front of the paintings like waves, sometimes pausing, sometimes flowing on without looking twice. For a while, it felt like nobody even noticed my piece. Then a man in his 30s stopped in front of Exit Wound and actually read the little card with my name and title. He was dressed like he had just come off a plane, blazer slightly wrinkled, eyes sharp behind tired lines. He stepped closer to the canvas, leaned in, and traced the outline of the painted ticket with his gaze. "What is the story?" he asked, looking around until he saw me standing awkwardly near the wall. For a moment I wanted to lie, to say it was just about travel or change. Instead I told him the truth, in a stripped-down way that fit inside a few sentences. I said my family had thrown away my chance to leave, that I had dug it back out of the trash and left anyway, and that this piece was about the cost of walking away from people who did not believe in you. He listened without interrupting, then asked a few questions about my process, my other work, my plans after the program. He handed me his card. His name was Marco Alvarez, based in New York, working in tech, but increasingly involved in the art world. He said my story and my work would resonate in Brooklyn, where half the cities seem to be made of people trying to reinvent themselves. At first, I thought he was just being polite, but a few weeks later he emailed, asking if I would be open to sending a few pieces to a group show in a small Brooklyn space he was helping fund. It felt insane to even consider it. I barely had money to survive in Paris, and New York was an entire ocean away. Still, I packed 2 canvases, filled out forms for shipping, and watched as the pieces that had carried me through my darkest nights disappeared into cardboard boxes. Months passed. I kept working, kept pouring coffee and stretching canvases. Then one morning, while I was wiping down tables in the gallery, Elise called me into her office. She held her phone out with an email open on the screen. The subject line had my name in it and the word sold in all caps. One of my Brooklyn pieces had found a buyer. The buyer was Marco himself, who said in his message that he was not just interested in owning my work, he wanted to talk about giving it a permanent home. His idea was simple, but terrifying. He wanted to open a small studio and gallery in Brooklyn dedicated to artists with stories like mine, people who had been told they were foolish, unrealistic, or a burden. He wanted me to be the first resident artist and co-curator, with my name on the window. My instinct was to shrink back, to hear my mother's voice calling me a dreamer, a beggar, a girl who did not understand real life. But then I thought about digging that ticket out of the trash, about the weight of that first envelope from the tourist, about every night I had spent alone in a dorm room believing that anonymity was safer than being seen. I looked at Elise, half expecting her to tell me not to get my hopes up. Instead, she said, "New York will not be kind, but it will be honest. And you, Olivia, are finally ready for that." When I stepped off the plane at JFK a few months later, dragging my suitcase into a city that smelled like exhaust and possibility, I had no idea that somewhere back in Arizona, the people who once called me a beggar were already starting to lose everything they had sacrificed me for. While I was figuring out subway maps and learning how not to get lost in Brooklyn, my old life in Arizona was quietly collapsing without me. Back home, my empty seat at the kitchen table did not stop the rent from being due. The bills kept coming, but the girl who used to open the cafe at dawn and slide cash across the counter every week was now pouring coffee for strangers in New York and keeping that money for herself. At first, Lisa patched the gap with more hours and more credit cards. She came home from the furniture store later and later, kicked off her shoes, and tossed unopened envelopes onto the counter like she could ignore them into disappearing. Jenna doubled down on her influencer dream. She filmed try-on videos in the brightest corner of the living room, ordered clothes she could not afford, and told herself every haul was an investment. When a bill came in pink or red, Lisa put it on a card and said it was temporary. When Jenna wanted another ring light, she said you had to spend money to make money. Taylor told me later that if anyone asked about me, they just shrugged and said I was still overseas playing artist, like I was a kid backpacking for fun instead of someone who used to cover half their bills. They did not mention that the house felt heavier without a second paycheck. The first real crack hit when the furniture store cut Lisa's hours, then cut them again. Less hours meant less money. The minimum payments grew teeth. Late fees stacked up. One evening, in the middle of dinner, the lights went out. No storm, no warning, just darkness and the sound of the fridge dying. The next morning, Lisa spent hours on the phone trying to buy more time from companies that do not care how hard you say you are trying. A few months later, she lost the job altogether. After that, everything sped up. They sold a TV, a couple of chairs, some jewelry. They held a yard sale where Jenna wore big sunglasses and pretended this was just a decluttering project, not survival. It was not enough. The notice to leave came in a thick envelope taped to the front door. They moved to a cramped apartment across town, then from that apartment to cheap motels, then to a shelter that smelled like bleach and tired air. Somewhere between the second motel and the shelter, Jenna finally scrolled past a name she had not said out loud in months. A mutual friend had shared an article about a new studio and gallery in Brooklyn called Carter Studio, run by an artist from Phoenix who turned family pain into mixed media pieces. The photo showed me in front of Exit Wound, standing under my own name printed on a white wall. The caption talked about a scholarship in Paris and a ticket thrown in the trash. Taylor said the room went quiet. Lisa sat down hard. Jenna stared at the screen like it might bite her. Everything they had mocked, everything they had tried to crush, was right there being praised by strangers. The word beggar did not sound as funny anymore. Shame could not feed them, though. After a few days of pretending the article did not exist, they ran out of pretending and out of money at the same time. With what little cash they had left, they bought 2 bus tickets to New York. Days later, dragging worn suitcases and wearing clothes they had already slept in, they followed a cracked phone screen's blue dot through Brooklyn until they were standing in front of a glass door with Carter Studio written across it. They took one deep breath they could not really afford and pressed the doorbell. Inside, while I was hanging a new piece on the wall, my phone buzzed with a security alert. I glanced down, tapped the notification, and watched the live camera feed load. 2 figures appeared on the screen, thinner, older, and nothing like the people who had laughed over a trash can in Phoenix. It took me a full heartbeat to recognize them. Then I did. My mother and little sister were on my front steps, and this time they were the ones asking not to be shut out. I stared at the screen for a long second, long enough for the bell to ring again, before I realized I was just standing there holding my phone in the middle of the studio with my mouth slightly open. Marco looked up from his laptop. "Everything good?" he asked. I swallowed and forced my voice to stay steady. "Yeah, just someone at the door," I said, even though the word someone did not come close to covering it. My heart was beating so hard it felt like it was echoing off the gallery walls. I set my phone down, wiped my palms on my jeans, and walked toward the entrance. Each step sounded too loud on the polished concrete. By the time I reached the door, I had to pause, hand hovering over the handle, just to remind myself that I was not the girl in the Phoenix kitchen anymore. I owned this door. I chose who came through it. I opened it a crack first, enough to look outside before swinging it fully open. Up close, my mother looked smaller, The Arizona sun had given way to New York winters, and her face showed it. Lines that had not been there 5 years ago cut deep along her mouth. Jenna stood beside her, arms wrapped around herself, the bright, glossy confidence I remembered stripped down to something raw and tired. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then my mom tried a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Olivia," she said softly, like she was testing if she still had the right to use my name, "you look good. You made it." I did not step aside. I leaned my shoulder against the doorframe instead, keeping the glass between them and the gallery. "Hi, Mom," I said. "Hi, Jenna." The air between us felt tight. Jenna broke first. "So this is really yours," she said, glancing past me at the white walls and paintings. "Carter's studio." "That is crazy," I shrugged. "Crazy is one word for it." She laughed once, but it sounded more like a cough. "Look, we did not exactly know how to," she started, then stalled. My mom cut in. "We came a long way, Olivia. We just want to talk." For a second I pictured the shelter, the bus ride, the way they must have stared at my name on that studio window. Part of me wanted to soften immediately, drag them inside, make coffee, pretend we were just a normal family visiting. But that part of me was the same part that had worked double shifts and handed over cash while being called a beggar. I owed that version of myself better than a quick collapse. "We can talk," I said. "Out here?" My mom's smile flickered. "Out here," she repeated like the sidewalk was an insult. "Why, you too good for us now?" I shook my head. "No. But that door behind me," I said, glancing back at it, "is my boundary. I did not have one in Phoenix. I do now." She opened her mouth like she wanted to fight, then closed it again. "We are in trouble," she said finally. "I know," I said. "I saw the article. Taylor told me some things." She looked embarrassed for the first time in a long time. "We lost the house. The job. Things got complicated." "Complicated," I repeated. "That is one way to describe choosing credit cards over hard choices." She flinched. Jenna jumped in like she always did when silence got uncomfortable. "We get it, okay?" she said. "We screwed up. We said things we should not have. But you left. You cut us off. You would not even answer calls." "There were not any calls," I said quietly. "There were never calls to say you were proud. Only calls when the rent was due." She started to protest, then stopped when she realized I was right. My mom looked at the sidewalk. "I know we were hard on you," she admitted. I was scared. "You wanted to chase some art fantasy in Paris while I held everything together." I panicked. "You threw my future in the trash," I said, literally. I am not sure there is a softer way to say that. Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment she looked like the mom who had once packed my kindergarten lunches and braided my hair. "I was wrong," she said. "I thought if I broke your dream first, the world could not do it for you. I thought keeping you close was safer. Instead, I drove you away." The apology did not erase what happened, but it was more than I ever expected to hear. Jenna shifted her weight, looking from her shoes to the door and back again. "I called you a beggar," she said, the word catching in her throat. "A lot, actually. The thing is," she looked down at her worn jacket, "now I know what begging actually feels like. It is not funny." I did not rush to comfort her. The silence that followed was not cruel, just honest. "What do you want from me?" I asked. No sugarcoating. My mom took a breath. "We need help," she said. "A place to stay for a while. Maybe some money to get back on our feet." "You are doing well. You can afford it." That old, familiar expectation rolled over me like a wave, the assumption that if I had anything, it was automatically theirs. I straightened up and stepped out onto the sidewalk, closing the door behind me so the latch clicked. "You are right about one thing," I said. "I am doing better. But the reason I am here is because I stopped treating myself like the family beggar. I am not going back to that. I am not paying off your choices. My mom's face tightened. So you are just going to turn your back on us? After everything I did for you? I met her eyes. You fed me and housed me as a kid, and I am grateful, I said. But you also used me. You threw away my ticket to a life where I was not trapped paying for your fears. Both of those truths exist. I am not rewriting them just because it is inconvenient now. For a moment, nobody spoke. Jenna sniffed and wiped her nose on her sleeve. So that is it, she said. You have a fancy studio, and we get nothing. I shook my head. No, that is not what I said. I am not going to save you, but I am not going to watch you drown either. I told them about the art program we had started at the studio, the workshops for adults who had been chewed up by life and needed a place to put the pieces back together. We partner with a local shelter, I explained. People who commit to the program get help with temporary housing and support while they rebuild. We have more people who need it than spots, but I can get your names on the list. You would come in like everyone else. Help clean, set up, follow the rules. No special treatment, no living in my apartment, no credit card bailouts. Actual work. Actual change. My mom looked stunned. You would send us to a shelter, I corrected her gently. I would connect you to a support system that does not depend on me sacrificing my life again. That is the only way I can help you without becoming the person you used to demand I be. Jenna opened her mouth to argue, then seemed to deflate. I am tired of being proud and hungry, she muttered. I am tired of pretending everything is content. My mom stared at the studio window, at my name printed cleanly there. I never thought you would be the one closing a door on me, she said quietly. I never thought you would be the one throwing anything away. I swallowed the guilt that line sparked and answered anyway. I am not throwing you away, I said. I am throwing away the version of our relationship where I am the beggar and you are the ones with all the power. If you want something different, it is there. I nodded toward the flyer taped on the glass about our next workshop. But you will have to earn it, just like I did. For the first time since I opened the door, they both fell silent in a way that felt less like anger and more like shock. They were used to me bending, apologizing, shrinking. This time I stood there, steady on my own sidewalk, and waited for their answer, knowing that whatever they chose next would say more about them than it ever again would about me. They did not give me an answer right away. My mom kept staring at the flyer on the glass, reading the words about healing and rebuilding like they were written in another language. Jenna just kept shifting her weight from one foot to the other, eyes flicking between me and the studio behind me. Finally, she said she was tired of pretending she had it all together when she did not even know where they were sleeping the next week. My mom did not look at me when she asked what exactly the program required, like she already knew she was not going to like my answer. I kept it simple. Show up, do the work, tell the truth, respect the rules. It sounded small, but we all knew it was bigger than anything money could fix. A few days later, after I spoke with the shelter coordinator and our nonprofit partner, their names were on the list. They started coming in twice a week, not through the front door during gallery hours, but through the side entrance that led to the workshop space. The first day, my mom held a mop like it was a foreign object, cleaning paint water that was not hers. Jenna stacked chairs and wiped tables, listening to the stories of people who had slept in their cars, who had left dangerous relationships, who had lost everything without ever once calling anyone a beggar. In that room, my family was not special. They were just two more people who had fallen hard and were trying to figure out which way was up. For me, those weeks were strange. I watched my mother pour coffee for strangers and listen instead of lecture. I watched my sister hand brushes to a woman rebuilding her life after years of being told she was worthless. Sometimes they made small talk with me about practical things, bus schedules, and supply deliveries. But we did not unpack the past every time we saw each other. The healing did not come in one dramatic conversation. It came in tiny moments that would be easy to miss. Like the evening I walked in and found Jenna sitting at a table, staring at a blank canvas. She asked if it was stupid to paint her own story when she did not even like the person she had been in it. I told her that was the point. Art was not about celebrating the version of you that hurt people. It was about documenting the version of you that is trying not to do it again. She laughed once, then started to paint. My mom took longer. She showed up, did the chores, sat quietly in the back during group discussions. One night, a man in the program shared how his parents had pushed him into a career that made him miserable, mocking him whenever he talked about what he actually loved. When he finished, my mom raised her hand slowly and said she had done something similar, only worse, because she had not just mocked her daughter's dream, she had tried to throw it away. She did not say my name, but she did not have to. Everybody there knew who she meant. Later, she caught me alone and admitted that when she called me a dreamer and made me feel small, she was really talking to herself. She had been too scared to take her own chances when she was young, so she punished me for taking mine. I did not tell her it was okay. I did not tell her we were even. I just told her I was glad she could say it out loud. Over the next few months, things shifted piece by piece. Through the shelter, my mom got connected to a job training program. Jenna picked up part-time work at a thrift store, which she hated at first, and then started to respect when she saw how hard people worked just to keep the doors open. They eventually moved into a small shared apartment with other program participants. Nothing like the house in Phoenix, but theirs in a way that the old place never really had been. We were not a picture-perfect family. Holidays were awkward. There were still days when my mom slipped back into old patterns, or when Jenna made a tone-deaf comment and had to catch herself. But there were also mornings where they came to the studio not to ask for anything, but just to help set up a workshop or sit quietly in the back while someone else spoke. Somewhere along the way, my anger stopped feeling like armor and started feeling like something too heavy to carry. I did not forget what they had done. I did not pretend our history was softer than it was. I just chose to stop letting that moment over the trash can be the only thing that defined us in my head. I poured the leftover hurt into new pieces, paintings about boundaries and second chances, about doors that close and windows that open somewhere else. People came into the gallery, read the little plaques, and saw themselves in the work. Some of them cried, some of them laughed, some of them signed up for the next workshop because they were tired of being stuck in the version of their story someone else had written for them. I started every new session of the program with a simple talk. I told them you cannot control what family you are born into, or how they treat your dreams. You cannot control who throws away your ticket, literal or metaphorical. But you can control whether you climb into the trash with it, or climb out and keep walking. I reminded them that setting boundaries is not betrayal. It is survival. That forgiving someone does not mean handing them your life to break all over again. It means taking your life back. Looking at the half circle of faces listening, I saw people from all kinds of backgrounds, all holding their own versions of shredded tickets and slammed doors. Some had been called lazy, some dramatic, some selfish. A lot of them had been called beggars in one form or another. I always ended the story the same way. In the end, I tell them, my revenge was not watching my mother and sister show up at my door with nothing. My revenge was building a life so solid that their cruelty could not shake it anymore, and then using that life to help other people stand up too. If you are listening to this and you feel trapped, I say into the mic, Whether your family doubts you, or your boss, or your town, remember this: you are allowed to outgrow the people who refuse to grow with you. You are allowed to walk away from anyone who treats your dreams like garbage. And you are absolutely allowed to build something beautiful out of the scraps they tried to bury you under. Not just for yourself, but for every person who will come after you, needing proof that it is possible.